General Audience number 99 of October 27th, 1982. The text of Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 33 speaks about the sacraments of the church, and in particular about baptism and the Eucharist, but only indirectly and in some sense by allusion, when it develops the analogy of marriage in reference to Christ and the church. And thus we read first that Christ, who loved the church and gave himself for her, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, has done so in order to make her holy by cleansing her with the washing of water accompanied by the word, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 26. This text, without any doubt, speaks about the sacrament of baptism, which has been conferred since the beginning according to the instruction of Christ on those who convert. The words quoted show in a very impressive way how baptism draws its essential significance and sacramental strength from the Redeemer's spousal love, through which above all the sacramentality of the Church herself is constituted, the sacramentum magnum. One can perhaps say the same thing also about the Eucharist, which seems to be indicated by the following words about the nourishment of one's own body. Everyone nourishes and cares for his body, as Christ does with the church, because we are members of his body. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 29 and 30. In fact, Christ nourishes the church with his body precisely in the Eucharist. One can see, however, that neither in the first nor the second case can we speak about a sacramental theology developed in much detail. One cannot speak about such a theology even in the case of the sacrament of marriage as one of the sacraments of the church. When it expresses Christ's spousal relationship with the church, Ephesians allows us to understand that on the basis of this relationship, the church herself is the great sacrament, the new sign of the covenant and of grace that draws its roots from the depths of the sacrament of redemption, just as marriage came forth from the depths of the sacrament of creation as the primordial sign of the covenant and of grace. The author of Ephesians proclaims that this primordial sacrament is realized in a new way in the sacrament of Christ and the church. It is also for this reason that in the same classical text of Ephesians, chapter 5, verses 21 to 33, the apostle turns to the spouses so that they might be subject to one another in the fear of Christ, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, and model their conjugal life, setting it on the foundation of the sacrament instituted in the beginning by the Creator. A sacrament that found its definitive greatness and holiness in the spousal covenant of grace between Christ and the church. Although Ephesians does not speak directly and immediately about marriage as one of the sacraments of the church, it nevertheless particularly confirms and deeply explains the sacramentality of marriage. In the great sacrament of Christ and the church, Christian spouses are called to shape their life and vocations on the sacramental foundation. Part 3, Sacrament and Redemption of the Body. Section A, the Gospel. The words of Christ and the mystery of redemption. After the analysis of the classical text of Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21 to 33, addressed to Christian spouses, in which Paul sets forth for them the great mystery, sacramentum magnum, of the spousal love of Christ and the church, we should return to those significant words of the gospel analyzed earlier, in which we saw the key statements for the theology of the body. Christ speaks these words, so to speak, from the divine depth of the redemption of the body. Romans chapter 8, verse 23. All of these words have a fundamental significance for man, precisely inasmuch as he is a body, as male and female. They have significance for marriage, in which man and woman unite in such a way that the two become one flesh, according to the expression of Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Though at the same time, Christ's words also indicate the vocation to continence for the kingdom of heaven, Matthew chapter 19, verse 12. In each of these ways, the redemption of the body is not only a great expectation for those who have the first fruits of the Spirit, Romans chapter 8, verse 23, but also a permanent source of hope that the creation will be set free from the slavery of corruption to enter into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 21. Christ's words which he spoke from the divine depth of the mystery of redemption and of the redemption of the body carry in themselves the leaven of this hope. They open the perspective on it, both in the eschatological dimension and the dimension of daily life. In fact, the words addressed to the immediate listeners are at the same time addressed to historical man in various times and places. Indeed, the man who possesses the first fruits of the Spirit groans, waiting for the redemption of the body. Romans chapter 8, verse 23. In him there is concentrated also the cosmic hope of creation as a whole, which in him, in man, waits with eager longing for the revelation of the sons of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 19. The sacrament of redemption and the indissolubility of marriage. Christ speaks with the Pharisees, who ask him, quote, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason?" Matthew chapter 19, verse 3. They ask him in this way precisely because the law attributed to Moses allowed the so-called certificate of divorce, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. Christ's response is, quote, "Have you not read that from the beginning the Creator created the male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and unite with his wife, and the two shall be one flesh?" So it is that they are no longer two, but one single flesh. Therefore what God has joined, let man not separate. Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. With respect to the certificate of divorce, Christ answers, "Because of the hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Therefore I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except in the case of concubinage, and marries another, commits adultery." Matthew chapter 19, verses 8 and 9. The one who marries a woman divorced by her husband commits adultery. Matthew chapter 5, verse 32. The horizon of the redemption of the body opens up with these words, which are the answer to a concrete juridical moral question. It opens, first of all, by the fact that Christ takes a stand on the level of that primordial sacrament, which his interlocutors inherit in a unique way, given that they also inherit the revelation of the mystery of creation contained in the first chapters of Genesis. At the same time, these words give an all-embracing answer to historical man of all times and places, because they are decisive for marriage and for its indissolubility. In fact, they appeal to what man is, male and female, what he has irreversibly come to be by virtue of being created in the image of God. Man who does not cease to be such even after original sin, although this sin deprived him of original innocence and justice. Christ, who appeals to the beginning in his answer to the question of the Pharisees, seems in this way to underline particularly the fact that he speaks from the depth of the mystery of redemption and the redemption of the body. Redemption means, in fact, a new creation, as it were. It means taking up all that is created to express in creation the fullness of justice, equity, and holiness, planned for it by God, and to express that fullness above all in man, created male and female in the image of God. In the perspective of the words of Christ to the Pharisees about what marriage was from the beginning, we also reread the classical text of Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 33 as a testimony of the sacramentality of marriage based on the great mystery of Christ and the church.